through 22. There was once a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This is what Job always did. One day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered, "The Lord, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, all that he has is in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. One day, when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of their sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was speaking, another came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels, and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. The word of God for the people of God. Good morning, Zion. It's good to see you all. Today's reading from the Old Testament story of Job grapples with profound suffering. To lose just one of the things that Job loses, such as his wealth and livelihood, would be devastating. But his loss doesn't end there. He loses his health. He loses not one, but all of his children. This is the type of loss people don't come back from. What's more, there's a complexity to Job's suffering. You see, Job did everything right. On paper, Job was the perfect person of faith. Yet despite all the right and the good actions that he took, he still experienced an unfathomable amount of suffering compared to others whose righteousness, frankly, would have been far more in question. And so the story of Job is not just about suffering, but also a story about fairness and justice in a fundamentally unfair and unjust world. Examples of injustice today are all around us. I've spent almost 30 years working towards educational equity as a teacher, administrator, nonprofit leader in regions across the country that serve predominantly low-income students. The students I've served are full of dreams, aptitude, and drive. These students are just as worthy of opportunity as any other, but I've seen firsthand how they don't have the same access to opportunity as their affluent peers due to the zip code they happen to be born into. I believe in my bones what educator Ron Edmonds said: we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need in order to do this. Whether we do must finally depend, he says, on how we feel about the fact that we haven't done it so far. I haven't given up working towards the idea of educational equity, but I grieve that our society has yet to show the collective will to resource public education in a way that sets up all kids for success. So for this reason and many others, like Job, I have often asked myself the question, why and how could an all-powerful and loving God allow suffering and injustice? Franciscan priest Father Richard Rohr, who I'll quote a few times in this message because he's a respected theologian, and well, frankly, I am not. I don't even know what I'm doing up here. He takes a stab at answering this question, suggesting that through Job's suffering, Job comes to a more holistic understanding of life, and therefore his experience of grief becomes both whole and holy. So said differently, suffering can lead to transformation. And Rohr continues, I believe, if I am to believe Jesus, that God is a suffering love. This God who suffers the most is also the God who saves the most. He who carries all understands all. He who has suffered all has a universal compassion. He who has been afflicted and lived is the bearer of hope. Rohr continues, the wounded one is always the gift given. And this takeaway, wrapped up in breathtakingly beautiful words, sometimes tracks for me. I can say, as probably many of you in the room can, that some circumstances in my life that felt devastating in the moment, like when my microphone fell off, not quite devastating, but still, let's see if I can save it. There we go. Sometimes felt devastating in the moment, sometimes led to deeper understanding and empathy that may not have emerged had it not been forged in that fire. And yes, despite the initial pain, I have ultimately been grateful for it. But when I play this line of thinking out, it gets tricky for me fast. Is this what we tell the child who getting treated for cancer, who as we speak is caught up in politically volatile deportation-related legal proceedings that could result in the child not receiving life-saving treatments? Do we tell that child, don't worry, your suffering will make sense down the road and you'll be better for it? No. And why are the most vulnerable so often disproportionately affected by suffering? So I struggle with the story of Job. And when I struggle with the story in the Bible, I like to explore what other faith traditions that are trying to make sense of the same larger powers at work have to say on the topic. And on the topic of suffering, I think Buddhism is really onto something. In thinking about both Buddhism and Job's approach to suffering, I found myself circling back to a paradox around the potential value of both letting go and holding on in the face of suffering. You see, Buddhism centers suffering, how we orient towards it and how we make sense of it, as foundational in its teachings. As poet and author Ocean Vuong states, Buddhism teaches that life is suffering. We know it's hard. We don't expect ease. Buddhism invites an acceptance that suffering is and will be part of life. It just is. Vuong continues, the real question is, what will you do with it? And I wonder sometimes whether what we do with it is practice letting go. We practice letting go of trying to control or mitigate it when we have no ability to influence it. We practice letting go of the grievances we're holding around it because they don't serve us. Because when you're late for work and you get stuck at that stalled train at a railroad crossing, what are you really going to do? Get out and move the train? The situation just is. Or when a relationship ends and you're standing in the ruins of it. It's over. Just is. So as Vuong asks, what are you going to do with it? But if there's sometimes value in letting go in the midst of suffering, I wonder if there's also sometimes value in hanging on. And I think that's where Job really gets it right. Of God, Job says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. For me, this kind of trust and faith in a higher power can be hard. But when I'm trying to trust the process, it helps me to remember that while suffering is inevitable, you know what else is? Love, care, connection, interdependence. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, awe-inspiring moments of synchronicity. As a metaphor for this, I often think of the murmuration of starlings. Often occurring no less at the magical hour of dusk, these murmurations involve vast numbers of individual birds twisting, turning, swooping, and swirling across the sky in such close communication with and connection to one another that they appear to be one beautiful, shape-shifting cloud. This reminds me that I'm part of something larger than myself, and I do call that larger something God. And if I'm struggling to feel connected to God, or even ideas, people, and things that are important, precious, or true to me, sometimes I think of myself as choosing to be in a boat with them. Silly, perhaps, but even when the seas are stormy, I stay in that boat. Because sometimes that commitment and clarity drives helpful action for me. And at other times of suffering, if that's hard, I just focus on holding on to myself, figuring out some small next best action I can take to help me move forward. For as Sufi mystic and poet Rumi wrote, as you start to walk on the way appears. Because sometimes the action helps drive the larger clarity and commitment. As Job holds on, he is an example of profound faith. Though he slay me, kill me, yet will I trust in him. But what I'd like to focus on for the rest of this message are what I think are some of the important clues Job offers on actions that can engender a more whole and holy understanding from suffering. One clue he provides is feel the feelings. In the days after I lost my mom, on a few occasions I was so overcome with grief that I cried out audibly in a way that surprised me. The sound I made that came from my body was a new sound to me. And I think that was lament. Job spends the first 7 days of his lament sitting on a literal and figurative dung heap of shock, denial, sadness, and anger. Been there, done that. Usually lasts longer than 7 days for me. And Rohr says, like Job, we must go through the stages of feeling. If we bypass these stages with easy answers, all they do is take a deeper form of disguise. Rohr continues, many people learn that the hard way through depression, addictions, irritability, and misdirected anger, because they refuse to let their emotions run their course or to find some appropriate place to share them. Job is unafraid to feel his feelings. Rohr says it's only because Job is willing to feel his emotions that he's able to come to grips with the mystery in his head and his heart and his gut. The second clue is ask the hard questions. During Job's crisis of faith, he yells at God and accuses him of all kinds of things. Some would consider what he says and does blasphemy, but I see a man whose honest lament helps drive the transformation. Have no doubt that God can handle our honest emotions and questions. And in encouraging and entertaining the questions, God's helping us work through it. Third clue, look to the mediator. In the throes of Job's pain, he says of God, there is no mediator between us who might lay his hand on us both. And I wonder if Job is looking for someone who can help him bridge the divide he feels between God and himself, help him make sense of the senseless. Remember, the story of Job predates Jesus, so if Jesus becomes that mediator, let's ask ourselves, what does Jesus do in the face of suffering and injustice in his lifetime that is instructive? A couple things come to mind that I want to leave you with today. One, stand against exploitation and exert your agency. In all four Gospels, we hear the story of the temple in Jerusalem that had become a place of commerce, exploiting the poor through unfair money exchanges and the sale of sacrificial animals. When Jesus saw this, he overturned tables and drove the merchants and money changers out, condemning the temple for becoming a den of thieves instead of a house of prayer for all nations. Driven by righteous anger in the face of exploitation, this was a powerful act of protest. We have agency, friends. Can we prevent everything? No. But we can exert influence. We can take actions that can prevent, interrupt, and ease the suffering of others and help bend the long moral arc towards justice. Secondly, come alongside one another and bear witness. In the book of John, when Jesus came upon Mary mourning the death of her brother Lazarus, we learn that Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And when Mary took Jesus to where Lazarus was laid, Scripture says simply, Jesus wept. Now, Jesus showed off eventually by raising Lazarus from the dead. But not initially. Initially, he just enters into the grief of Mary, Martha, and the whole community. He simply wept with them. In her book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen writes, I suspect that the most basic and powerful way to connect to one another, to another person, is to listen. Perhaps the most important thing we ever give each other is our attention. Listening is the oldest and perhaps the most powerful tool of healing. When you listen generously to people, they can hear truth in themselves. And in the silence of listening, you can know yourself in everyone. Eventually, she says, you may be able to hear in everyone and beyond everyone the unseen singing softly to itself and to you. God be with you, Zion. Thank you.